let me guess. You were on the internet and someone somewhere told you that you have to have this massively complicated birth plan document to get the birth that you want. But let me tell you, you can actually simplify the birth plan writing process, so stick around. Hey, welcome back. I'm Tina B. I'm a labor and delivery nurse. And for our new friends, welcome to the simplest birth plan writing video that you're going to find on the internet. I'm going to let you in on some big news here. You don't actually need a birth plan to have a baby. I'll say it again. You don't need a birth plan to have a baby. You could just roll into your facility and you could have your baby. But if having a plan in your head or on paper makes you feel better and more calm about the birthing experience, then let's do that. Let's make you a birth plan. I am going to break this birth plan writing down into 5 areas. Before I get into the areas, I want you to do something. First, I want you to write or type the words birth plan. Now I want you to take a big deep breath in, and I want you to delete the word plan, and I want you to write the word preferences. Now, please don't hate me. I want you to know something. Childbirth is probably one of the least likely events in your life that you're going to encounter that is plannable. Okay, let's get organized. At the top of the page, I want you to write your name. And then if you have a title that you want people to use, mom, mama, parent, whatever it may be, you can write that in brackets. And then underneath that, if you have a partner with you, you're going to write their name. And of course, if they have a title they want, you could write that as well. Then you're going to write your provider's name so that whoever is involved in the birth of your baby knows who your provider is. And then if you have an additional support person, you could write that in there. It may be a doula. You could write doula and their name, or it could be your mom or your sister or your best friend, whatever it is, you can write that at the top so that people know who's supposed to be in the room. And then importantly, if you want people to stay out of the room, specific people, you are going to write that at the top as well. The 5 areas of your birth plan are going to be environment, labor, pain control, birth, and postpartum. So let's tackle environment first. This is going to go over basically any way you want the area to look while you're having your baby. This can include all the lighting, the way you want it to sound, and the way you want it to smell. Sometimes. A lot of facilities do have a scent-free policy, so make sure that you ask ahead before you break out anything like aromatherapy or natural oil rollers, anything like that. But lighting. Lighting's a big one that we don't often think about. You end up giving birth in the fluorescent lighting if you don't think ahead. So if you want to include, twinkly lights or Christmas lights or a star projector or flameless candles, you can write that on your birth plan and then you can pack that in your hospital bag. This is also going to be where we talk about what it should sound like. If you want a quiet or a silent birth where you want as little noise as possible from the outside sources, you can mention that on your birth plan. If you want to bring in your own music, just mention, I'm going to bring in my own music, and then make an incredible playlist, including whatever music that you really like to vibe out to for your childbirth. You can also bring in, sound machines that involve nature sounds or water sounds, whatever you need to get you in the mood for having a baby. If you didn't already include it at the top of the page, environment would be a great place to talk about who you want in the room and who you don't want in the room. This is a place where you could also mention about learners, if you are okay with learners or if you don't want learners in the room with you, because a lot of facilities, especially hospitals, if they're a teaching hospital, will have lots of extra staff that might accompany your provider or might accompany your nurse. Student nurses, residents, student doctors, interns, things like that. And if you're into minimal interruptions, just write that on your birth plan so that people know that you would really like the most amount of privacy that you are able to have while safely having your baby. Next section on your birth plan is labor. Now, this could include a ton of information. This could be a 40-page document all on its own. I'm going to go over what I think are the most important things to talk with your provider and your team about and to write down on a birth plan if you're making one. Number 1 answer being cervical checks. People are like, I have control over cervical checks in labor. Yes, you do. It is your body. You have control over it. You have bodily autonomy. However, there are going to be times where a cervical check might actually be necessary in the course of your labor and delivery process. And I'm going to go over that in a minute. But on your paper, you could write down things as specific as, I don't want any cervical checks, and I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not a fan of that one. I'm going to tell you why shortly. Or you could say, I would like minimal cervical checks, or you could say, I would like you to explain why a cervical check is necessary before you suggest it, or you could say, I would like a cervical check when I feel like I'm ready to push to make sure it's safe to do so. You could be as specific as you want, or you could just chat with your provider about cervical checks before you actually go into labor to have your baby. Now, There are something I call need to know cervical checks and nice to know cervical checks. The nice to know cervical checks, these are the ones if you want to avoid them and you want to write it on your birth plan, you could write that down, because there are some cervical checks where the information, it's nice to know. It will give us some ideas of what's going on. However, that information is really not going to change the course of your care plan as you give birth to your baby. These are things like if you're in the office, your provider's like, oh, you're close to term, let's see what your cervix is doing. Or maybe it's been a certain amount of time that you're in labor and we haven't checked your cervix. We could say, oh, let's check your cervix and see how that's going for you. Those are like nice to know cervical checks, but there are need to know cervical checks. These are the cervical checks where in doing them, the information that you gain from the exam itself is actually going to benefit the health and safety of your baby and could drastically change the trajectory of your childbirth experience. These are things like maybe you're preterm, you come in cramping and contracting. We want to know, are you in preterm labor? Or we're watching your baby, suddenly baby's heart rate does a big dipperoo. We want to see, is there a cord that has come down in front of baby's head, because that's an obstetrical emergency. Or maybe you're laboring along and for some reason we think, maybe that's not actually a head. And we want to see, is it a head or is it a foot or a hand or eyes or a brow or, whatever it may be. We want to know because that could change how you safely deliver your baby. So when you're thinking about refusing all cervical checks, I would really, really caution this, because there are times where refusing all cervical checks could actually really, really cause harm to your baby if it is an obstetrical emergency and we're missing it because we are not getting the information that that cervical check could provide. Just something to think about. Next big one is IV access. A lot of sites, quite standardly, when you go into labor, they'll want to site an IV either in your hand or in your arm to have that IV access. Now, on your birth plan, you could write, I do not want an IV, or you could write, I'm okay with an IV, or you could write, I want an IV saline lock. And a saline lock would basically get you the access to the IV. So it would still be a needle, but instead of the big tubing and all of the extra fluids and the pole that you have to cart around when you're in labor, you are then going to only have a small tubing that is taped down to your hand. And this would mean that you have that IV access handy in case of an obstetrical emergency, either during your labor or once you've given birth to your baby, but you don't get all of the extras along with it. The next one to tackle could be fetal heart rate monitoring. There are 3 options available for fetal heart rate monitoring. There is continuous fetal heart rate monitoring, there is intermittent fetal heart rate monitoring, and then there is internal fetal heart rate monitoring. You could talk about being okay with these or not okay with these or having a preference to one or the other. I'll quickly explain them so that you know more about them. Continuous fetal heart rate monitoring is exactly as it sounds. It's going to be having the 2 monitors on your tummy, watching baby's heart rate continuously while you are in the labor and the childbirth process. Now, this has pros and cons. Some cons are that you are strapped to the monitor. Some places have wireless monitoring. That's really cool if they have that. But a lot of places still have the old school strapped to your belly and then strapped to the monitor. So you are attached to the monitor. And some research has said that continuous fetal heart rate monitoring could lead to unnecessary interventions because we have our eyes on baby's heart rate the whole time, and sometimes we are jumping to the conclusion that there is an issue if there's not actually an issue. So read up on continuous fetal heart rate monitoring if you want to know more about that. Obviously, the pros to it are that we have our eyes on baby the whole entire time. If you're not into it, you're not into it. You could write that on your birth plan. The next option is going to be intermittent fetal heart rate monitoring. This is often used when it is a low-risk pregnancy and you have gone into spontaneous labor. There are no things like meconium in the fluid. There's nothing telling us that there are issues we should be closer monitoring baby for. This is basically going to be a set amount of time. Lots of sites have different amounts of time. For myself at my site, it's every half an hour. We are going to listen to baby's heart rate for 1 full minute, and we are listening to make sure that it is at a good rate and that it is a nice regular rhythm and that we don't hear any dips in baby's heart rate when we are listening. And just a heads up, if we are doing intermittent monitoring and we listen to baby and while we are listening we hear something that doesn't quite sound right, we will want to switch over and put you on the fetal heart rate monitor to get more of an NST tracing before we could say, yep, let's continue with intermittent fetal heart rate monitoring. But the pros are that you are not strapped to a monitor, you can move around freely, and then the cons are going to be that you don't have your eyes on baby the whole time. And the last one that is most invasive, this is something that we generally will only use if there is a major issue with baby's heart rate or we really can't pick up baby's heart rate continuously and we need to in the case of a high-risk pregnancy. This is going to be internal fetal heart rate monitoring. This is done by attaching a lead wire to baby's scalp. It actually goes into baby's scalp and it gives us continuous fetal heart rate monitoring. So I just want you to be aware of it. People are generally not putting on their birth plan, please do internal fetal heart rate monitoring, and your provider doesn't want to do internal fetal heart rate monitoring unless they really need to. One of my favorite things to put in this section, pushing positions. Pushing positions. We know by now that laying flat on your back for childbirth, it ain't optimal. It ain't optimal for perineal tears. It's not optimal for changing positions of your pelvis to allow baby to come through easier. It's not optimal for blood flow. It ain't optimal. So if you have looked into alternate pushing positions, I'm going to include a video for you. Put that on your birth plan. It's going to signal to your team that you have done your research, and hopefully they can support you to hit those goals of your childbirth experience. And a lot of these can be done with an epidural as well. So don't let anybody tell you that it can't. Just make sure that your epidural is functioning well enough that you have movement of your legs. You can be specific here. You can say, I want to try this, 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 and this position. Or you can say, I would like to try alternate positions for pushing and labor that don't involve me laying on my back. Or I would like to stay out of the lithotomy position. You can be as specific or as general as you want here, but if you've looked into alternate pushing positions, write it down on your birth plan. If you've done any reading or research on breathing techniques or how you want to push your baby out, this is a section to include that as well. I'm going to link a video here for you on breathing techniques in case you want to learn about it now to include it on your birthing plan. You can say things like, I want to do open glottis pushing, or I want to lead my own pushing efforts, or I would like you to guide my pushing, or I would like you to tell me how I'm doing, and if you don't see descent of baby with pushing, I would then like you to let me know and lead the pushing efforts. Again, you can be as specific or as generic as you want, but you have a few options here: open glottis pushing, closed glottis pushing, or you can do guided pushing, or you can do self-guided pushing. You can write anything you want in here about pushing and breathing. And lastly, some people do care about what they wear in the childbirth experience. So if wearing a hospital gown versus wearing something that you own is going to affect you one way or the other, feel free to write it down on your birth plan, or just wear whatever you want to wear. You don't actually have to write it down. Welcome to the pain control section of your birth plan. This one can be as big or as little as you want to. And please don't think that because you go into your birthing experience thinking one thing about pain control and it changes, that makes you any more of a success or a failure. There is no failing or succeeding. There is only having a baby. Please keep that in mind. So if you go into your birthing experience and you write down, I do not want an epidural, and then you get into it and you're like, this is a lot more intense than I anticipated, I think I want an epidural, and you ask for one, that's fine. And the other way too, if you go in saying, I would like an epidural in labor, but you get there and you're like, oh, I'm actually coping pretty well, and you say, I don't want an epidural, it doesn't make you one way or the other. It makes you having a baby the way you want to have a baby. And it's okay to change your mind on your birth plan. Here are some of your options for pain control in labor. You can have comfort measures, you can do nitrous gas, you can have opioid analgesia, you can have what's called a pudendal, that will be a local anesthetic, or you can have an epidural. You could also bring in from home things like a TENS machine, or a comb to squeeze into your palm, or tennis balls to rub over tense muscles, anything like that. Being aware of your pain control options is really, really important because it's going to empower you to make those choices on your journey to your childbirth goals. I'm going to go ahead and link a video up top for you that explains those childbirth pain control options and the pros and cons of each. But if you're talking about comfort measures, the tennis ball on the muscles, or the comb in the hand, or the TENS machines, anything specific like that, you're likely going to want to bring those into hospital yourself because not all sites will have the same. And on your birth plan, you can be as specific or as general as you like, just like all the other sections. You can say, I would like an epidural, or I don't want an epidural, don't ask me, or I would like to guide my own pain control with comfort measures, or please have the nitrous oxide readily available. Something we haven't talked about yet is water therapy. So this is going to be a warm shower or a birthing tub. Now, birthing tubs, not all facilities have a birthing tub available, so make sure you call ahead if that's something that you're interested in. But water therapy is really, really good because the warm water temperatures, it relaxes your muscles. Being in a water tub, it makes you feel more buoyant. If you're in the shower, the pressure of the water on your back can feel really, really good on muscles as you're contracting. If water therapy is something important to you, include that on your birth plan. Next section, it's a big one. It's birth. This is going to be everything from the moment your baby sort of crowns to having your baby and then delivering your placenta. It's going to be everything in there, and seems like a short period of time, but there are a lot of things that can happen in that short period of time. So let's go over some of the ones that I think are the most important. If you want a mirror for pushing, put it down on your birth plan or mention it when you first get to hospital. Sometimes the mirrors, they're like way back in a back storage room collecting dust because not everyone's as crazy about a mirror for childbirth as I am. But if you want it, you can pop that down on your birth plan. Next big one would be episiotomy. This is where they make a cut in the perineal skin to make the vaginal opening wider to accommodate baby's head. Now, this should only be done when it is medically necessary. So if you want to talk about an episiotomy on your birth plan, you totally can. You can say, I do not want an episiotomy, or you can say, If an episiotomy is needed, please explain to me the reasoning and get my consent before you do it. Now, that shouldn't need to be said on a birth plan, but if I were you, I would put that on my birth plan about episiotomies. Next thing we can talk about is, how are you going to push? Do you want the provider to have their hands on, supporting the perineum and maybe doing some perineal massage as you're pushing baby out? Or do you want a hands-off pushing technique where the hands are off and they're just there to catch baby and your body is doing its own thing? These are two different techniques that you can read up on. While baby was crowning, I loved to touch my baby's head. This is one that's really sort of 50-50, like 50% love it, 50% hate it. I loved it because if you feel baby's head when you're pushing, because you can't really feel much else, if you feel baby's head, you can feel how much is out with one push, and you can feel baby's head again after another push, and you can actually feel that there might be more head there. So for me, it was really, really encouraging. I found it super cool. If it's something you're into, you can just ask to do it or mention it, or you can write it on your birth plan. Here's one to think about if you happen to be against this medication. Very standardly, when your baby is born, more specifically their shoulder is born, we give you a dose of Pitocin or oxytocin in the IV preferably, or in the muscle if you don't have an IV. This is really, really standard. So a lot of times you'll either talk with your provider about this in office, or myself as a nurse, I always mention it sort of when I first get my patient assignment. We talk about what's going to happen at delivery, and I talk about it then and get consent. But a lot of times this is done so routinely that at birth we're going to give it. So if you are against this when you are talking about it, you're going to want to jot that down on your birth plan and very likely also mention it coming closer to the birth. Some providers are actually okay with your partner catching the baby or you reaching down and pulling baby out in a vaginal delivery. If your provider is okay with this, and you'll know this way beforehand, you can put that down on your birth plan. And then once baby comes out, are you having a surprise baby? Do you not know the gender of your baby? One of my favorite things is when the baby comes out and you don't know what you're having and the partner announces the gender of the baby. It's chef's kiss, I promise you. So if that is something that you are interested in, and I strongly encourage it if you're into it, make sure you mention it and put it on your birth plan so that nobody steals the thunder when that is all done. And then we can talk about delayed cord clamping. Delayed cord clamping is, of course, delaying the clamping of the cord for a set amount of time. Now, ACOG recommends 30 to 60 seconds, but you can be as choosy here as you want. Some people do a minute, that's probably more standard. Some people wait till it is white and stringy and has stopped pulsing, so you know all the blood is back. Whatever you like, just pop it down on the birth plan. And then, who is cutting the cord? Don't forget that. And the last part of your birth plan, postpartum. This is all about you and baby while you are in hospital. And the first thing I would put on there is skin to skin. We all know how important it is. We don't call it the golden hour for nothing. So on your birth plan, you can talk about it. I want immediate skin to skin, or I would like blank number of minutes of skin to skin, or blank number of hours of skin to skin, or I would like baby rubbed off before putting baby skin to skin, or I don't want skin to skin. But you want to talk about it on your birth plan. You are going to have some decisions to make, and depending on where you live, you're going to have things offered to baby that you need to make choices about, and you should make them ahead of time so you have lots of time to read about them. The 3 things that you might be offered for your baby following delivery are going to be erythromycin eye ointment, hepatitis B vaccine, and the vitamin K injection. So on your birth plan, you can say yes to all scheduled medications, or you can be more specific. Yes to ... and no to ... whatever you want to do, pop it on your birth plan and make your wishes known, because this is your baby and you need to consent to anything given to your baby. You may want to address how you're going to feed your baby on your birth plan. So you can say, I am going to formula feed, or I am going to breastfeed, or I am going to breast and formula feed. And then you can get more specific in those sections if you wanted to. For formula, you could say, I want to give this type of formula to my baby, or I want to spoon feed my baby, or you can say, I want to be the only one to give my baby formula, something like that. If you're breastfeeding, you can say, I want to do immediate breastfeeding, or I will do self-guided breastfeeding, or you can say, I would like the assistance of a lactation consultant for breastfeeding if one is available. And then you can talk about a pacifier as well. I do not want a pacifier given to my baby, or I do want to use a pacifier on my baby. And some of these, they kind of go by the wayside because now it's more common to have baby with you all of the time. So all of those decisions are being made by you in the moment with your baby. Very commonly now, baby's first bath is delayed by 24 hours. So you can talk about first bath in there. You can say, I want to delay baby's first bath, just to have it on paper. But most places, just so you know, will delay baby's first bath. And if you had a boy, you could put something down about circumcision. You could put, I plan to circumcise my baby, or I do not plan to circumcise my baby. And your placenta, if you want to keep it for whatever reason, that's totally fine. Just put it on your birth plan and it's all yours for the keeping. I do want to mention there are some checks that need to be done on baby to make sure baby is transitioning to the outside world just fine, but those checks can definitely be done while baby is skin to skin with you, unless of course baby needs some sort of resuscitation, at which point they could be taken off of you and placed in the warmer, which is very likely in the room with you, but those checks can be done skin to skin. And finally, in postpartum, you can talk about visitors. You can say, I'd like to restrict visitors at this time, or I would like to allow visitors postpartum. You can be as specific as you want to. But that's basically building your birth plan. There are 5 areas you can talk about. You can pick a few items from each one if they are of importance to you, and then your team can do their best to make those important things happen for you. But if you enjoyed this video, you know what to do. Give it that thumbs up, consider subscribing, and I will see you next time.